The sheriff's hand rested on his holstered weapon as he barked the ultimatum that would change everything. You have 60 seconds to step away from that truck, or you're going in cuffs. Behind him, Karen Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, that smug smile spreading across her face like she'd just caught the neighborhood's most wanted criminal. What she didn't know was that I had every legal right to be there. Moving my grandmother's antique rocking chair into the ranch house I'd closed on just 3 days earlier. What she also didn't know was that her little power trip was about to backfire in ways that would destroy her reputation, her finances, and her stranglehold on our community forever. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm a 42-year-old Army veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to work as a paramedic in Dallas. After 15 years of saving lives in the city, I'd finally scraped together enough money for a down payment on my dream property, a modest ranch house on 8 acres in the quiet community of Oakwood Hills, about an hour outside the Metroplex. The place wasn't much to look at white clapboard siding that needed paint, a red metal roof with a few patches, and a small barn that leaned slightly to the left, but it sat on rolling hills covered with oak trees and had a creek running along the back boundary. More importantly, it was mine. I'd found the listing through a buddy who worked in real estate. And the price was right, because the previous owner had died, and his kids just wanted to sell quickly. The whole transaction took less than a month. And I was thrilled to finally have a place where I could keep a few horses, maybe some chickens, and enjoy the peace I'd been craving since my discharge. My ex-wife had gotten the house in Dallas in our divorce 2 years earlier. So this ranch represented a fresh start, and a chance to build something for myself. The closing went smoothly on a Tuesday morning in early October. My attorney, Sarah Chen, walked me through all the paperwork, and I left the title company with a deed, keys, and the overwhelming feeling that I'd finally made it. The property had been sitting empty for almost a year, so I knew it would need some work. But that was part of the appeal. I'd always been handy with tools, and the thought of fixing up the place with my own hands felt therapeutic. I spent that first week after closing doing basic maintenance, checking the plumbing, testing the electrical, and making a list of repairs. The neighbors seemed friendly enough. An older couple named Bill and Martha Jenkins lived in the house to the east, and they'd waved when they saw me working in the yard. To the west was a modern 2-story home belonging to a young family with kids I could hear playing in their backyard. Directly across the gravel road stood Karen Whitmore's pristine colonial, complete with manicured landscaping and a flagpole flying both the American flag and some kind of decorative autumn banner. I'd noticed Karen watching me from her front window during those first few days, but I figured she was just curious about the new neighbor. Oakwood Hills was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and change didn't happen often. The community had an HOA, but according to my real estate agent, it was pretty relaxed, just basic rules about maintaining your property and not running commercial businesses from your home. That assumption proved catastrophically wrong. The trouble started on moving day. Exactly 1 week after closing, I'd rented a U-Haul truck and recruited my brother Jake to help me move my belongings from the storage unit where I'd been keeping everything since the divorce. We started early, around 7 in the morning, figuring we could get most of it done before the Texas heat became unbearable. I was carrying a box of my military medals and commendations when Karen appeared at the end of my driveway. She was probably in her mid-50s, with bottle blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and wearing what looked like a tennis outfit. Despite the fact that it was barely past dawn, everything about her posture screamed authority. From her hands planted firmly on her hips to the way she'd positioned herself directly in my path. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice that could cut glass. "I need to see some identification and proof of ownership for this property." I set the box down carefully and walked over, assuming this was some kind of neighborhood welcome committee thing. "Hi there. I'm Marcus Thompson. I just bought this place last week." Her eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down, taking in my worn jeans, army t-shirt, and work boots. "I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA enforcement officer for Oakwood Hills. I've lived here for 12 years, and I know every property owner in this community. I've never seen you before, and this house has been empty for months." "Well, it's not empty anymore," I said, forcing a smile. "Like I said, I closed on it last Tuesday. If you'd like to see the deed, anyone can forge documents." She interrupted. "What I see is someone loading furniture and personal items from a truck into a house that doesn't belong to them. That's called theft, and I have a responsibility to protect this community." My brother Jake had been listening from the truck bed, and I could see his jaw tightening. He'd dealt with enough bureaucratic nonsense during his own military service to recognize a power-hungry petty tyrant when he saw one. "Marcus," he called out, "you want me to get the folder from the glove compartment?" "That won't be necessary," Karen said sharply. "I'm calling the sheriff's department right now. They can sort this out." She pulled out her phone and started dialing before I could say another word. I stood there in disbelief, watching this woman call the police on me for moving into my own home. The whole situation was so absurd that I almost laughed. But something in her expression told me she was deadly serious. "Yes, I need to report a burglary in progress," she said into the phone, never taking her eyes off me. "Someone is stealing furniture and belongings from 247 Creek Valley Road in Oakwood Hills. No, I don't know the suspects, but there are 2 of them with a rental truck. Yes, I'll stay on the line." 23 minutes later, 2 sheriff's cruisers came racing up the road with lights flashing. I was carrying my grandmother's rocking chair, the one piece of furniture I'd specifically requested when she passed away 5 years earlier, when the first deputy jumped out of his car with his hand on his weapon. "Drop what you're carrying and show me your hands," Deputy Miller shouted, his voice echoing across the quiet neighborhood. I gently set the rocking chair down on the porch and raised my hands, my heart pounding as I realized how quickly this situation had spiraled out of control. Behind the deputies, Karen stood with her phone out, recording everything like she was documenting the capture of a wanted fugitive. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I own this property. I have all the documentation in my truck." "Ma'am, what exactly did you witness?" Deputy Miller asked Karen. "I saw these 2 men loading furniture and personal belongings from that truck into this house," she replied. "This property has been vacant for almost a year. I know every homeowner in this community, and I've never seen these people before. They're obviously thieves trying to steal from a vacant house." Deputy Miller looked back at me. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification and proof of ownership." I slowly reached for my wallet and handed him my driver's license, then walked to the truck where my closing documents were stored in a folder in the glove compartment. My hands were shaking slightly as I pulled out the deed, title insurance policy, and closing statement from the title company. Deputy Miller examined the documents carefully, checking the property description against the address and comparing my name on the deed to my driver's license. His partner, Deputy Rodriguez, had been questioning Jake, who was explaining that he was just helping his brother move into his new house. After what felt like an eternity, Deputy Miller handed my documents back. "Everything appears to be in order. Mr. Thompson, you're the legal owner of this property." Karen's confident expression faltered for the first time. "That's impossible. Let me see those papers." "Ma'am, I'm not required to show you anything," I said, my patience finally wearing thin. "These are private documents, and you have no authority to demand them." "I absolutely do have authority," she snapped. "I'm the HOA enforcement officer, and it's my job to ensure community standards are maintained." Deputy Miller turned to her. "Ma'am, being an HOA officer doesn't give you the authority to detain property owners or demand to see their personal documents. Mr. Thompson owns this house legally, and he has every right to move his belongings into it." The color drained from Karen's face as she realized her mistake. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "Well, he still needs to register with the HOA and get approval for any modifications or improvements. There are rules in this community." "I'm sure we'll figure all that out," I said diplomatically. "Right now, I just want to finish moving my things." The deputies left after taking a brief report about the false alarm, but Karen lingered in my driveway for another 10 minutes, muttering about community standards and the importance of following proper procedures. When she finally stalked back to her house, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen launched what could only be described as a campaign of harassment designed to make my life miserable. It started with a formal letter delivered to my mailbox on HOA letterhead, informing me that I was in violation of community landscaping standards because I hadn't mowed the grass within 72 hours of taking ownership. The letter demanded that I correct the violation immediately or face a $50 fine. I found this odd since the grass wasn't particularly long, and several other properties in the neighborhood had yards that looked worse than mine. But wanting to be a good neighbor, I borrowed a mower from Bill Jenkins and cut the grass that weekend. 3 days later, another letter arrived, this time citing me for having unauthorized vehicles on my property. Apparently, my 2018 Ford F-150 pickup truck didn't meet the community's standards for appropriate residential vehicles. The letter demanded that I remove the truck or face escalating fines. This made no sense at all. My truck was clean, well maintained, and less than 5 years old. I could see at least 6 other pickup trucks parked in driveways throughout the neighborhood, including a rusted-out Chevy that looked like it hadn't run in years. I called the phone number on the letterhead to speak with someone about the violation. Oakwood Hills. "Oh, this is Karen speaking." Of course it was. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Marcus Thompson. I received a letter about my truck being an unauthorized vehicle, and I'm confused about. The rules are clearly stated in the community covenants." She interrupted. "Commercial vehicles and oversized trucks are prohibited in residential driveways." "But my truck isn't commercial, and it's a standard half-ton pickup. There are other trucks in the neighborhood that—" "Mr. Thompson, I don't have time to explain every detail of our community standards. The violation notice stands. You have 72 hours to comply." She hung up before I could respond. The harassment escalated from there. Over the next month, I received violation notices for having my trash cans visible from the street, even though I'd put them out the night before pickup, just like everyone else. Failing to maintain appropriate seasonal decorations. I didn't have Halloween decorations up in October. Parking my truck in the wrong direction in my own driveway. Having an unauthorized structure on my property. This referred to my mailbox, which had been there when I bought the house. Violating noise ordinances by running power tools during prohibited hours. I'd been using a circular saw at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Each violation came with escalating fines, starting at $50 and increasing to $200 for repeat offenses. The letters became increasingly threatening, warning that unpaid fines could result in liens against my property or even foreclosure proceedings. But the written harassment was just the beginning. Karen also began conducting what she called property inspections, showing up unannounced to walk around my yard with a clipboard, taking pictures and making notes. When I asked her to leave, she claimed she had the legal right to inspect any property in the community for HOA compliance. she recruited other neighbors to spy on me, asking them to report any suspicious activity or violations they observed. I learned this from Martha Jenkins, who apologetically told me that Karen had been pressuring her to document every time I came and went from my property. The situation reached a breaking point in early December when I came home from a 3-day shift rotation to find that someone had spray-painted violation in red letters across my mailbox. When I called to report the vandalism, Deputy Miller took a report but said there were no witnesses and no way to prove who was responsible. That same week, I received a certified letter from something called Oakwood Hills Legal Services, demanding that I appear at a community hearing to address my pattern of willful violations and face possible suspension of my community privileges. The letter was signed by Karen Whitmore in her capacity as Chief Enforcement Officer. This was when I decided I needed professional help. I called Sarah Chen, the attorney who'd handled my closing, and explained what had been happening. She listened patiently as I described the harassment, the escalating fines, and the threats of legal action. Marcus, I think you need to see the HOA's actual governing documents, she said. Based on what you're telling me, there are some serious procedural problems with how this is being handled. What do you mean? Well, for starters, HOAs can't just make up rules and enforce them arbitrarily. They're bound by their own covenants, conditions, and restrictions, plus state law, and this Chief Enforcement Officer title concerns me. Most HOAs have boards of directors that make decisions collectively, not individual enforcement officers with unilateral authority. Sarah requested copies of all the HOA documents from the management company, and what she discovered changed everything. It turned out that Oakwood Hills had a 5-member board of directors, and according to the meeting minutes, Karen Whitmore hadn't been re-elected to the board in over 2 years. She had no official authority to issue violation notices, conduct property inspections, or collect fines. More importantly, none of the violations she'd cited me for were actually covered in the community's governing documents. The CCRs were relatively simple: maintain your property in good condition, don't run commercial businesses from your home, and don't make major exterior modifications without approval. There were no specific rules about truck types, trash can visibility, or seasonal decorations. But the real bombshell came when Sarah dug deeper into the HOA's legal structure. It turned out that Oakwood Hills had failed to file required paperwork with the state for the past 3 years, which meant the HOA had technically dissolved and had no legal authority to enforce any rules or collect any fines. Marcus, this woman has been running a completely fraudulent operation. Sarah explained. She's been collecting money under false pretenses and threatening legal action she has no authority to take. What she's been doing isn't just harassment, it's criminal fraud. Armed with this information, I realized I had been the victim of an elaborate scam. Karen had been using her former position and official-looking letterhead to intimidate new residents into paying bogus fines and following made-up rules. I wasn't her first victim. Sarah's research revealed that at least 6 other homeowners had paid thousands of dollars in fraudulent fines over the past 2 years. The question now was what to do about it. Sarah and I developed a plan that would expose Karen's fraud publicly and ensure she faced the full legal consequences of her actions. First, we documented everything, every violation notice, every fine, every threatening letter. We also contacted the other victims and gathered their evidence. Next, Sarah filed complaints with both the Texas Real Estate Commission and the Attorney General's office, alleging that Karen had been operating an illegal debt collection scheme and fraudulently representing herself as having legal authority she didn't possess. But we decided the most satisfying approach would be to let Karen hang herself with her own rope. I called the number on the HOA letterhead and told Karen I wanted to attend the community hearing she'd threatened me with. I said I was prepared to pay all outstanding fines, and wanted to resolve the situation once and for all. She was obviously pleased by what she saw as my surrender. "I'm glad you're finally taking this seriously. Mr. Thompson, the hearing is scheduled for this Saturday at 10 a.m. in the community center. Bring a cashier's check for $1,847 to cover all outstanding violations and administrative fees. I'll be there," I promised. That Saturday morning, I arrived at the community center with Sarah, Deputy Miller, who'd agreed to attend as a witness, and 3 other victims of Karen's scam. The hearing was set up in the center's main room, with Karen sitting at a folding table with official-looking documents spread out in front of her. She'd even brought a gavel. About 20 neighbors had shown up, probably expecting to see me get dressed down for my violations. Instead, they were about to witness Karen's complete humiliation. "This hearing is called to order," Karen announced, banging her gavel. "We're here to address the numerous violations committed by Marcus Thompson and determine appropriate sanctions." "Before we begin," I said, standing up, "I have a few questions about the authority of this hearing." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're here to answer questions, not ask them." "Actually, I think the neighbors deserve to know who exactly has been collecting fines and making up rules in their name," I replied. I turned to address the room. "How many of you have received violation notices or paid fines to Mrs. Whitmore over the past 2 years?" Several hands went up around the room. "And how many of you voted for Mrs. Whitmore to serve as an HOA enforcement officer?" The hands stayed down, and confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah stood up and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sarah Chen, Mr. Thompson's attorney. What you need to know is that Mrs. Whitmore has no legal authority to issue violations, collect fines, or hold enforcement hearings. She hasn't been on the HOA board for over 2 years. And the HOA itself dissolved 3 years ago when it failed to file required state paperwork." The room erupted in shocked voices as neighbors began connecting the dots. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "Mrs. Whitmore has been operating an illegal fraud scheme, collecting thousands of dollars in bogus fines and threatening legal action she has no authority to take. We have documented evidence of at least $12,000 in fraudulent collections over the past 2 years. Karen's face had turned bright red. "This is ridiculous. I have been protecting this community's property values and maintaining our standards." "By what authority?" I asked. "Show us the legal documents that give you the right to fine residents or inspect their properties." Karen fumbled through her papers, but couldn't produce anything beyond the expired HOA documents that no longer had any legal validity. Deputy Miller stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, based on the evidence Mr. Thompson's attorney has provided, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, theft by deception, and impersonating a public official." The handcuffs clicking around Karen's wrists was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. As it turned out, Karen's legal troubles were just beginning. The Attorney General's office launched a full investigation that uncovered a pattern of fraud going back even further than we'd initially discovered. She'd been using her fake authority to extort money from homeowners, threaten elderly residents, and even forge documents to justify her actions. In the end, Karen was charged with multiple felonies and ordered to pay restitution of over $23,000 to her victims. She also faced civil lawsuits from several homeowners whose lives she'd made miserable with her fraudulent enforcement actions. The judge at her sentencing hearing was particularly harsh, noting that Karen had exploited her neighbor's trust and weaponized bureaucracy to satisfy her own desire for control and financial gain. She received 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation. As for the neighborhood, we decided to formally dissolve any remaining HOA structure and simply operate as a regular residential community. Property values actually increased after Karen's removal. As word spread that Oakwood Hills was no longer under the thumb of a tyrannical fake HOA enforcer, I still live on my ranch, and it's everything I hoped it would be when I first signed that deed. I've got 3 horses now, a small vegetable garden, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing no one can threaten to take it away with bogus paperwork and manufactured violations. Karen's house went up for sale 6 months after her conviction, and it sat empty for almost a year before finally selling to a young couple with twin toddlers. The sound of children laughing in that yard feels like the perfect ending to this whole ordeal. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it's worth the wait.